Okay, now you have a good description of the coin flip data. So remember, we had 100 people. Each of them flipped one coin 20 times, and then they recorded the number of heads that they had. Typically, we would expect this to be right around 50%, so 10 heads out of 20. But 100 people is fairly limiting if we want to start making decisions about this data. So what I'm going to show you now is a tool called randomized simulation. And if you look below, if you look below this video, there's a link to a tool called StatKey. And I'm going to go to StatKey right now. So let me share my screen out with you. Okay, here comes my screen. Okay, so this is what StatKey should look like. Now there's lots of tools in here, but what I want to do is I want to do what's called a test for a single proportion. Now let's pause and think about this for a second. There's a lot of words you can ignore on this page. That's perfectly fine. But single proportion. Proportion means percent. Single proportion means we have one proportion. I'm talking about the number of heads out of 20 flips. If I got, say, 11 out of 20, that would be 55%. That's a single proportion. So click into that one. And what you get is this blank simulator. Now, I'm going to walk through this very slowly, and I need you to walk through with me. If I press Edit Data, now let's presume that you flipped a fair coin. Now, you would expect, let's say maybe 9 or 10 or 7 or 8 or something like that, coin flips out of the 20 to be heads. So let's say for me, I got 9. I'm just making that up. You can make up your own. And I flipped 20. Now, everybody here needs to have 20. So typically you would have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that out of 20. I'm going to press OK. Now, I'm going to randomly generate more data that is just like the data that I found. So if I click Generate One Sample right over here, now my new sample, that person got 9 out of 20 again. I could generate another sample. I got 11 out of 20. Now I've plotted both of those. Generate another sample. There's somebody who got 10 out of 20. Generate another sample. There's somebody who got 8 out of 20. Well, that gets boring clicking one at a time, so what if I just generated 100 more samples? Now I've got 104 people that have all flipped a coin 20 times. Well, what if I generated 1,000 more samples? Or 1,000 more? Or 1,000 more? Now I've got 3,104 people that have all generated 20 coin flips, and they counted the number of heads that they got. So I'm looking here at a fair coin that is fixed at 50%. Now, let's talk about that for a second. This thing called the null hypothesis. Null means baseline or our assumption, or I'm sorry, hypothesis means assumption. Null means baseline. Now, if we're talking about fair coin flips, my baseline assumption is that I should have a proportion of 50%. Oh, it erased everything. All right, I'm going to generate 1,000. I'm going to generate 5,000 of these. Okay, so I've got 5,000 coin flips based on a baseline assumption that our coin flips should give us 50% heads and 50% not. So now the interesting questions get to happen. When would you, as a reasonable person, say, hey, you know what, I'm suspicious of your data, and I think you might not have a fair coin? So say you have someone come to you and they say they've got 18 heads out of 20. Now, 18 out of 20, let's see what that is. 18 out of 20 is 90%. That's right down here. That 90%, that's, oh my goodness, that's so tiny right down there. That's so incredibly small. I can't even tell how big that is. The probability of that happening under our baseline assumption is super small. I am very suspicious of that. Now I can quantify that more. That's on the right-hand side. So if I click this button, right tail, I can tell you that that person who got 18 out of 20, that is less than 2.5% chance. Less than 2.5% of our 5,000 people had that. I'm quite suspicious of that person. Now, furthermore, like somebody here that got maybe 16 out of 20, there were a few of them, but really not so many. Right? That's less than 2.5%. I'm quite suspicious of those people. Right? What if somebody came to you and said, well, I only got 4 heads out of the 20. Now let's see here. 4 out of 20, that's a 20%. That's down here. That's my left tail. If I click on the left tail, well, that's also less than 2.5%. I'm very suspicious of anything that kind of falls out in those far tails because it looks like they happen very, very rarely. Moreover, between about 30% and about 70%, that's where most of our data falls. So if somebody says, well, I had 35% of my 20 coin flips turned out to be heads, great, I'm not super suspicious of that. Somebody says I had 10%, I'm pretty suspicious of that. That seems like weird data to me. So I want you to use the ideas in this video, and I'm going to link the video through the next several questions, to answer questions about weird data. The whole idea here is we're trying to quantify what weird might be.